Hello and welcome to Suzi's Book Bag, hosted by me, Suzifeay. I've got all my accoutrements today. A bit of a fur collar. It's fake fur, I have to say. I have my cat mug, and I have, if you can see it, I have my cat ring. And the book bag I have behind me is not actually connected to the publisher of the book I'm going to be talking about, but it's got a bird on it. So I thought if there are any cats watching, they might enjoy that. That little invitation into their world. Inviting into my world of book bag, is Kathryn Hughes. Hello, Kathryn. And there is a cat there, so your cat can enjoy the little bird and moon symbol I have.
She will. She'll enjoy that.
Good morning to you.
Good morning, Suzi.
We're going to have a feline hour because we're going to be talking about your wonderful book, Catland, which I have been very much enjoying. So you are a Victorian specialist. You've written biographies of George Eliot and Mrs. Beeton, and you've written on the governess. Was it the fact that you are a cat lady that drew you to cats? Why was this your next project?
Well, I mean, yes, I'm a cat lady. It would be pointless, pretending otherwise, because the evidence is there in the background. But actually, if I'm putting my serious hat on, I thought cats were actually very similar to governesses. In the sense that, governesses are those sort of people who are hiding in plain sight in the Victorian landscape. We all sort of know what they are. We've all read Jane Eyre. They're a sort of slightly sad woman who doesn't belong upstairs or downstairs, but you don't spend much time thinking about them. And their employers certainly didn't. Nobody had ever written a book about the Victorian governess, believe it or not. And so I sort of started thinking that actually, in a way, cats are the same sort of creature in that they're there. Victorians had cats. They often didn't think about them. And then towards the end of the 19th century, they thought about them rather a lot, just as the Victorians started to think about their governesses rather a lot. In that case, as a problem, what do we do with them? Are they any good? Victorians went slightly the other way from not thinking about the cat at all to thinking about it really rather a lot and making a pet of it. And so I sort of thought by taking these kind of liminal marginal figures and sort of undoing them, you could find out more about Victorian attitudes in general, if you see what I mean. So yes, I am a cat lady, but that's not the main point. It's not a cute book about cats. It's a book about Victorians' attitudes to cats and what we've inherited from them.
Yes, they're a very interesting prism through which to see other aspects of Victorian life. And the main sort of way you look at this whole issue is through the work of one man whose work, I mean, he's a cover artist, and that sort of style is familiar today. I mean, he's part of the vocabulary, really, the visual vocabulary that we have inherited. His name was Louis, or is it Louis Wain?
Louis. He's from a French family, so Louis
Wain. Tell me how you came across him.
Well, he was, just to be clear, I mean, he was a household name in the late Victorian period. He was, you saw his work everywhere, every newspaper, every magazine had a Christmas annual. So he sort of saturated the culture. And that went on until the First World War. Well, when I was growing up, so I was a child in the 70s, my grandmother was a cat lady. She actually bred blue Persians. She also had a lot of Louis Wain books around. So I grew up with that. And the thing is that I found them a bit frightening. So it's very interesting. So people often talk about Louis Wain now because he's having a bit of a renaissance, and people go, "Oh, cute cats, cats in frocks, nice." But there's always something slightly odd about Louis Wain's world. I mean, you can even see it on the cover. I think those cats are. I don't know what was. They're coming at you. They're coming at you, and they're coming at each other. And so that the pictures he drew, for instance, one that always fascinated me that my grandma had was of Louis Wain cats in a classroom. and they're making riot. So like bully cats are chucking spiders at the well-behaved cats, and the cat mistress, Miss Tabby, can't keep control. So there's a massive amount of sort of dysfunction. And I think as a very well-behaved child, I knew what it was like to be in a classroom where the bullies were coming for you with a spider, not literally. But it seemed to me that he would use his cat to put his finger on the place where there was always a sort of tension or a dysfunction or some sort of dislike that wasn't quite articulated. And of course, cats actually are so good at that, because if you do try to get your cats together on a play date with your neighbour's cats, it never works out well. There's a lot of bullying and fighting for territorial supremacy and that sort of thing. So I think what Wain was very clever at doing was taking these strange animals with their strange ways and sort of mapping them onto Edwardian society, and seeing that there was quite a correspondence. There were worries about class, race, of course. Blue Persians are pure breeds, Moggies are not. And looking at the ways in which he could sort of articulate those tensions in people society through cat society. So that's where I first started. I always knew about Louis Wain, and he's become more popular recently again. Actually,
I guess he's collectible. I mean, do people? Yeah. I mean, these little figurines that he did like in life. I mean, we'll talk about the variation in style in his long career, but what I found was interesting, and I don't know how much you knew about it, was how kind of emblematic his life turned out to be. I mean, you can get a lot out of just going through his life, which you do in the book. He's like, he made me think of a sort of Richard Dad, but with cats instead of fairies. How much did you know about his life?
Well, can I just say, that's so interesting you mentioned Richard Dad, because, Richard Dad killed his dad and ends up in Bethlehem, which is in fact where Louis Wain does at the end of his life. So it's an extraordinary symmetry. I knew that he'd had an unhappy life. It was sort of quite well known that he'd couldn't manage his own money, and that he'd had more and more sort of mental dysfunction. Very hard to put your finger on it, but he was less and less able to cope with the world. I knew that he'd ended up in Bethlehem. What I didn't know, and you're so right about it being emblematic, was that a lot of his stress and tension was to do with a very common situation. That he was an elder boy, and then he had 5 sisters, none of whom married. And so at the age of 20, when his father died, he was suddenly presented with this colossal job of keeping a family of 5 girls, a mum and himself, afloat, using his sort of nascent talent as an artist, a commercial artist. And that is an extraordinary burden. But it wasn't a unique one at all, because the Wain family were, let's say, from the lower middle class. The girls are not going to go out and work in service. They're not actually going to work in behind the counter in Selfridges or anything like that. They need to be kept in some sort of genteel type leisure. I mean, that's very, very expensive. And this poor young man, slightly frail, slightly fragile, is put in charge of this kind of slightly unwieldy household. None of these girls marry. And they all live together for their reasonably long life. And I found that so interesting because, of course, Wain is doing this at a time before old age pensions, at a time before income support. It's a very brutal world of late Victorian capitalism. It's placing all the responsibility on men in particular. And frankly, who wouldn't go a bit odd under those circumstances? So I was very interested in that. I was also very interested in the sort of internal contradictions which you come across as a biographer, in that the people you write about will never do the things that you think they should do. So I would have liked Wain and his sisters to be ardent feminists, to be supporting female suffrage, to be members of the Liberal Party, if not the nascent Labour Party. That's what I would like. That would be how the story would go. Of course, they're not. They're diehard conservatives. They're completely against female suffrage. Arch imperialists. They think the Boer War is a jolly good thing. So, there's, as we all are, mixtures of odd interests and self-interest, self-knowledge, and then strange political blind spots. And that's why they were so interesting in that emblematic way. I found. I mean, it's not a showy story, but I thought it gave a sort of ballast to all the cats doing cute things, if you see what I mean. It had this sort of serious spine.
Well, the other thing about it is that, I mean, we're used to, this is somebody who spanned the Victorian era and really went up to the birth of modernism and went through various artistic styles. I mean, the other thing about him is, well, I'll go back to something that touched me a lot, which was that he had a cleft palate, which kind of makes you look a bit like a cat. You have that sort of, you know, I just wondered whether there was something in that, but it obviously made him a very self-conscious person as well.
Do you know, Suzi, this is absolutely honest. Until an American critic made that point about a cleft lip in particular, making you look slightly cat-like, it had never crossed my mind. This is absolutely true, which just goes to show you what sort of odd blind spots you can have as a writer, sort of missing something so extraordinary. What I would say is that it, of course, because this was a time before corrective surgery was possible. I mean, these days, babies who are born with split lips, I think the surgery is done very, very quickly within the first few months of birth and heals very nicely. Not possible then. So he goes through life like that. And of course, you go to an all-boys school, you're going to be the object of a huge amount of bullying. And that's where I think he goes back and redraws that picture of cats being bullied in the schoolroom all the time. He returns to it obsessively. And I don't think one would be reading too much into it to think, that's what he went through. Certainly he describes going through that. Luckily for him, because he is a man, when he's 18, he's able to grow one of those sort of bushy late Victorian Edwardian moustaches, which sensibly he hangs on to for the rest of his life. And it's just very lucky that none of his sisters had a cleft lip, for instance, because can you imagine what it would be like as a woman going through that? I think that early psychological sense of being different, of being bullied, of looking strange, must have fed into a very particular way of looking at the world, knowing its everyday cruelties, knowing a sort of language of glances, of pitying glances, scornful glances, and being able, as I said before, to map them both onto the world of the cat, but also onto the world of people. So I do think it had a profound effect, yes. What we don't know is whether he also had a cleft palate, which would have affected his speech. People often referred to him as speaking in a very low, concentrated way. Now, I don't know if that was he devised a way of overcoming the cleft palate in the speech. Other people suggest now that he might have been neurodivergent, so he might have had a particular way of choosing his words and then bringing them out all in a stream. I don't think you can diagnose retrospectively, and I'm not sure that it's very helpful. But I think what you can do is paint a picture of difference, physical difference. So Maud likes that point. Maud is very proud of herself and would like to point out that there is nothing strange or off-putting about her at all, that she is actually perfect.
She has a magnificent tail. She just... Yes, we got a good sight of the tail. So Catland throughout the book is partly the world of Louis Wain, and it's a world where cats go to law, as you've said. They go to school, they go to dances, picnics, they go boating. I mean, they do extraordinary things. But even in this world, you can't really imagine cats doing, like diving into water and swimming and things like that. But it's this wonderful, as you say, mirror of Victorian Edwardian society. But Catland, the book, also takes us through, you hinted this beforehand, a completely different view of what cats were and what they could be in the human world. So they start off really being just mouses. And that's what you chart. It's this social history of the cat itself. Yeah,
that's right. I mean, for 4 centuries, they have been pest controllers, that you would have a cat in the kitchen or in your shop or in your warehouse, in your farmyard, as a handy way of keeping down the mice and the rats. So while it's a pest controller, the cat is also really just one up from being a pest itself. They're often anonymous. You often just call it puss, cat, hey you. That blinking nuisance. I mean, they are not personified at all. They are expected to catch their own dinner. I mean, it would seem ludicrous that you would go out and kind of get special food for them. They're there to keep themselves. And then gradually, from about the 1850s, I think, you see a change in the way that some people regard their cats. They start to, as it were, become individuals. They get names. They often get slightly daft names like Princess Snowy. They go from having no name to having slightly quasi aristocratic names. So Sir Snowflakes, and they come up from the kitchen in some cases. This is not in all houses, come up to the drawing room and become the sort of pet that we know. And they have an honoured place in front of the fireplace. So they become a family member rather than the lowest servant that you could possibly imagine. And that's what I wanted to chart. And then, especially if the house where there are children will often sort of learn certain sort of social protocols. If Snowflake dies, it's a useful way of children learning how to grieve. You might bury Snowflake at the bottom of the garden under an apple tree. It's a way of practicing certain sort of emotional responses to the very ordinary problems that we all go through and that humans go through. So they become integrated as family members, and in some cases, of course, absolutely doted on. So the newspapers start to become full of these stories about stupid old women, rich old women, that's the gravest sin of all, who leave their fortunes to their cats so that their cats can be brought up or kept in the manner to which they've been accustomed. And the local newspapers in particular love these stories. So old maid leaves fortune to cat, and then there'll be like 3 paragraphs of scoffing copy, about clearly this woman, has sort of flouted social norms, but also possibly spiritual norms, because animals don't have souls. So she has sort of bypassed her deserving nephews and nieces and lavished all this attention and these economic resources on a mere cat. So very interesting kind of moral and social dilemmas get played out as well through those sort of stories. At the same time, I have to be honest, we still have stories about boys who have kicked cats down the street or thrown them on the bonfire. But the interesting thing is you start to see stories in the local press about boys being prosecuted in the magistrates' court for those kinds of cruelties. So whereas before that was just a lark, boys will be boys, you start to get magistrates saying, now you, young Christopher, what you've done is very, and I am sentencing you to a month in jail in some cases. So it's multifaceted, but there is a shift.
Well, it's just sort of intensified, really, when you think of Choupette, Karl Lagerfeld's cat, and cats rule the internet. I mean, I think that was their great plan. I mean, Maud is saying nothing on this, but I think, I also remember seeing a wonderful cartoon of a load of cats, very Louis Wain style, round a table in a boardroom, and they're talking about the arrival of Amazon and going, now how can we get more cardboard boxes into our homes?
It's true, because as somebody who has to get a lot of books and review as you do, and you can see I get a lot of cardboard boxes. It's bonanza day when the Amazon man arrives. It's they're literally there helping me unpack. It's extraordinary. I mean, I would just say,
yeah, go on, sorry.
Well, I would say also, I mean, I think you touched on something very interesting again. So when Louis Wain cats, for instance, go to law, which they do a lot, it's very interesting. Certain people are benefiting from this, the judge and the lawyers, who look like they're very pleased because they're billing by the hour. You know, they're very happy. But there's always, a cat in the dock, and he's brought a civil case against somebody for a lot of money, and it hasn't gone well. And so he's now in hock to the tune of, £100,000 or something. So it goes wrong. Law is not a safe space, just as the tennis court isn't a safe space at all. Cats cheat constantly when they're playing tennis. They pretend a ball is out when it isn't. They lower the net. And courtship is particularly problematic in Louis Wain's world because basically somebody is always playing somebody else. So it's either two girls after the same cat boy, or it's more likely to be two cat boys after the same cat lady. So there's a lot of scenes where somebody is upset. Somebody is sobbing over a love letter that hasn't been returned. Somebody is on occasions going to fisticuffs with a rival. So there's always these kinds of tensions, which I think he does very, very well.
You point out that the trope of the cat lady, the single cat lady, well, she has never gone away, but she also features in this book. There's a fair few eccentrics, but what is it, do you think? What is it about this idea of women having cats that some people find so troubling?
I know, including J.D. Vance, apparently, the Republican senator, who said of Kamala Harris, she's a sad, disappointed cat lady. It's extraordinary that you could still be saying that. And I'm very pleased to see that Taylor Swift came back quickly and said, I'm a cat lady and there's nothing sad or disappointed about me. I think it's multiple. With all these very complex issues, it's always multi-layered or over-determined, as historians like to say. I think that there's always been a tie-up between cats and women because there's witches, for a start. I mean, it goes right back to the cat, the witch crazes of the 17th century. There's a sense in which the cat is, I think, out of bounds, out of control. So unlike a dog, man's best friend, which knows to sit and knows where to sleep and knows to accompany a man on a walk and knows where to put itself. There's something very boundaryless about a cat. We all know that. There's jokes about trying to herd cats. They will never be told what to do. And I think that's why it's a very useful trope when you're dealing with pesky women who won't be told. Either because in the case of these very rich cat ladies leaving their fortunes to the cats, they have bypassed the social rules should say that money, which they probably inherited from their fathers, should go back to preferably nephews. So these cat ladies are, literally kind of breaking open the patriarchy. They're refusing to do what they're told. I think there's other worries. It is the case, and I didn't know much about cat sex until I started this book, but and I want Maud to slightly shut her ears at this point, except it doesn't matter because she's been arranged for. But unneutered cat ladies are actually very cats are given that they're so sedate about most of their physical activities, using a litter tray and so forth. When it comes to sex, they are extraordinarily out there. So girl cats come into season twice a year if they're not fixed, and they will go looking for sex. So I know friends of mine who've got unneutered cats. There's something very shocking about a girl cat in season. I mean, she does seem almost possessed. They writhe around on the floor. They get very friendly with your leg. They're begging for it. I mean, that's what the hormones tell them to do. So that will have been observed because there was no neutering of cats back in the 19th century. So those cats in heat will have been very, very obvious. And what they do is the cats in heat call to any male in the district. I mean, they're not fussy. And during their period of being on heat receptive, they will mate with as many guy cats as they can. I was going to say get their paws on. They literally will. So I mean, there's something and that is why, for instance, when they produce their litters, often the litters have different fathers, which is why, if you breed cats and your cat is going out in the garden, it may well have ginger cats, black and white cats, and tabby cats. They will have different dads. I mean, it is an absolute case history of a sort of promiscuous female who has no shame, who literally will go with anybody. And this is getting played out very publicly, especially in urban areas where houses are very close together. So I think there's something about that, the cat as prostitute, that actually then gets mapped onto women as well. I think it's no surprise, Manet, the great sort of painter of modern life in Paris, when he wants to show us prostitutes, like Olympia, very famous picture, there's a little cat there.
Cats. Yes.
Yeah. It's, and the cat there is doing a lot of symbolic work. It's about
a little black cat, isn't it?
It's a black cat.
Which, to make it even worse, it's a black cat. To make it even worse. Yeah.
So it's unregulated sexuality. She's just waiting there for all comers. And she's going to charge, because this is quite obviously about a sex worker that Manet is painting. So it's something very shocking about all those ideas which are sort of around the idea of the cat. And I think it's very easy then for them to get mapped onto, frankly, to any woman you don't like the look of. Any woman who slightly annoys you, who's a bit sort of uppity, who's a little bit not dependent on male money, attention, whatever. The cat is the symbol to hand.
In looking at Louis Wain's work, another really fascinating thing about Catland is that when we look at the Victorian era, we often look, he does span more than the Victorian era, but we think about the pre-Raphaelites, and we do think about George Eliot and high culture. This is a world of cheap annuals, of Christmas cards, of postcards, of knickknacks. I mean, that's very interesting in its own right. It's worthy of study in its own right, isn't it?
Wain produces what's now poshly called ephemera in museum terms. It is stuff that is designed to be made and then chucked or lost. It's not designed to be put on the wall and looked at for the next 40 years. And that's what's so, I was very, very interested in material culture. And this in the late Victorian period, where we have mass printing, new sorts of printing, new sorts of pictorial reproduction. Suddenly, there's a world for cats to be present, for Louis Wain to be present everywhere. And I find that so fascinating. So he does, as you say, his designs are on 1,000. There's 1,000 different designs on postcard. Louis Wain designs on postcards. He has an annual every year. Not very good. Usually it consists of things that he couldn't sell during the preceding 12 months. So it's like not his best work, but there's a sense it's a Christmas market. So it's a Christmas market. Christmas cards, Wain, like Beatrix Potter, like Enid Nesbit, who the children's writer, they all start producing Christmas cards. That's where they all start their work. They're all illustrators. They all start, even Enid Nesbit started like that. So there's this kind of these new mass market ways of getting your work out, and that's what, in a way, creates Wain and makes him so interesting. And of course, the very interesting thing about ephemera, Victorian ephemera, as anybody will know from going on eBay, it doesn't actually disappear. There are so many Wain postcards available for, a couple of quid on eBay. You can buy the annuals, this ephemera doesn't go anywhere. It just circulates around the economy, moving into different kinds of economies. And so now, as I say, a Wain postcard that perhaps cost £6 at the time now goes for maybe £5 on eBay. So there's something very kind of thrillingly impudent about its resilience. It refuses to go away and die. And now, as you said very rightly, now Wain's work is incredibly collectible. I couldn't afford it. Some of it goes for thousands and thousands of pounds. And again, I sort of think that's slightly his last laugh. He's
Do the originals exist, or were they, I imagine his originals might have just been sent off to the printer, sent off to the publisher, and then just got rid of as not being of any worth once they were reproduced? Does much
Well,
survive?
what was unfortunate, he sold his copyright outright, as a lot of artists did. So what happened, once a magazine, even a very good reputable magazine, had got some of his artwork, they owned it, they would keep it, they would put it in a file, and then they would bring it out, or they would sell it on for secondary rights. So quite a lot of it does exist. There are dealers who deal with the work. So quite a lot of it does exist, but it's really expensive now. That's the really interesting thing. So even a little black and white design would go for several £100 now. And if you wanted one of his gorgeous kind of seascapes with cats diving off the end of the pier or going fishing, that would cost you more than £20,000. It's a lot of money.
Wow.
Yeah.
And the tragic thing about it is, and this is the story that's woven through, that he was skint, for the reasons that you've outlined, but also because there wasn't really copyright as we know it now. He wasn't sort of benefiting from the secondary market. Was he a workaholic?
I think he was, and I think, as so many of us are, I think the workaholism did perform quite a useful function. I think it might have kept his mental world within bounds, within if you've got to get up, and he reckoned he produced over 1,000 cat designs a year. If you've got to hit that target, it gives you a focus, it gives you a thing to be doing. It keeps perhaps difficult thoughts or feelings in check. So while I think he was a workaholic, I suspect that was might not have been such a bad thing. And you say it's very, very sad. So when he really does, so after the First World War, demand for his work tends to kind of go away. People have moved on. That's when he starts to go, his mental health problems become more and more difficult. Fewer people want his drawings. He can't sell work. Nobody wants him. And it's at that point, 1922, when he loses a big sort of contract, he starts to display more and more symptoms of being that are just impossible, are not safe for him to be at home with his sisters. He becomes slightly violent to his sisters. And so in 1924, he is, we would say today, sectioned, but, he's committed as a lunatic to the pauper lunatic asylum. So there is no money to pay for somewhere quite nice like Bethlehem, or one of the many private small mental hospitals around the country that dealt with, genteel people who had mental problems. The sort of place that T.S. Eliot's wife went to, for instance. There are a lot of these sort of country houses on the edge of London. Can't afford those sort of fees. He goes to the pauper lunatic asylum, which is just as grim as it sounds. It is a dormitory where you're allowed very, very few possessions. He's got no money for artworks at all. It is absolutely horrible until he is rescued, which perhaps we can talk about. But the point is, it's got that bad. It's where all those desperately clinging on to signs of gentility, which he and the surviving sisters have been doing, they've sort of run out of road,
But let's talk a little bit about the style. I mean, you say that eventually, he was out of fashion, but he had a long run. I mean, it's really quite extraordinary. And we can probably attribute that to the fact that it's cats. But he starts off, they don't wear clothes. Yes. I mean, that's the first kind of thing when he goes, God, they'll be even cuter or even funnier if I dress them up. Yeah. But he goes all the way through. What I was fascinated by was the fact that he saw the futurist, the exhibition of futurists and post-impressionism. And this is what makes me really respect him as a visual sort of worker, that he kind of builds that into his work. It's incredible, isn't it?
I think this is so important, Suzi. And there's never been a biography of him before, by the way. So one of my things that I wanted to do was to explore the fact that, yes, sorry, I've got another cat coming up to take part.
Oh, right.
Sorry, slightly distracted. He just wants to add a few points. He thinks I've missed some things out. Yes, no, Wain had gone to art school in London. He was I can't say he was a great artist, but he was a very, very competent artist. And he was a real artist, a true artist, in the sense that he constantly went to the exhibitions. He was constantly interested in what was going on. As you say, he saw the 1912 Futurist exhibition in London, which scandalized so many people. He saw the 2 post-impressionist exhibitions run by Roger Fry, those ones at which, English artists like Vanessa Bell were joined by Picasso. He went to the Japanese exhibition in 1910, which was held at White City, which was really the first chance for many people to see Japanese art, that very particular kind of flat kind of. He drinks in all this stuff. He has an eye, and he starts to incorporate those kinds of ways of doing and ways of seeing into his work. So, for instance, fascinated, as a lot of artists were, by this Japanese and even Chinese way of flat working, of just washing panes of color onto a flat surface, of not doing depth. He then produces a range of futurist porcelain cats in which are crazy looking, and which the English public, who like to think of cats just wearing pinnies and playing tennis, are just appalled by. They think he's absolutely lost it, because why is Mr. Wain, who does those lovely cats, producing these hideous cats? They're green, they've got orange spots all over them, they've got writing scribbled up. I mean, if you've seen the Futurists' work, you absolutely know what he's doing. I mean, it's entirely logical. It hasn't come from nowhere. It's not the product of a diseased brain. It's a very considered response to what's going on in the art world. But of course, his mainly middlebrow audience couldn't read him like that. Other adjustments he makes are more commercial, but no less kind of clever. So when the postcard comes in, it settles on its size pretty quickly. It's the size we know today. That means that his cats have to be drawn slightly differently. They have to become shorter or fatter to fill the frame, especially if he's going to do 3 of them. So his cats become much chunkier. They become what's called mascot cats. They're firm, sturdy little people, instead of the slightly more kind of svelte-like cats that he used to do. They don't look like cats at all. They look like teddy bears, in fact. But it's interesting. This is a calculated kind of intervention. He's able to make those adjustments quite consciously. So I think it is very, very important to kind of. I mean, why? There you go. You see, that looks so different from an early cat. And what's just and perhaps we'll jump ahead, or later we'll come to. By the time he's in this. I mean, completely different from what he was drawing at the beginning. And then by the time he spent some time in the asylum, he then starts drawing in a way that is, I mean, it's cubist. There's sort of no other way to say it. It's
also trippy.
I
mean, it is beautifully illustrated. I mean, there are lots of black and white illustrations, but he goes absolutely towards the end.
Hold that up again, Susie. Just hold those up again. Of those trippy cats, if you can find them, because psychiatrists.
Well, that's one.
Okay, so the psychiatrists who treated him in the 30s, right the way through to the 1960s, said, "There you go. That's the work of a madman." Clearly, he'd lost it. They diagnosed him as schizophrenic. There is nothing. I mean, those images are disturbing, but they are extraordinarily carefully executed. The draftsmanship is extraordinary. Underneath some of them, you can see the grid structure that he's drawn with in pencil. No, they're densely plotted. There is nothing. This is not therapeutic work of somebody who is completely lost touch with reality. It's again another quite considered, I think, kind of response. And I just find it so interesting. So he starts as a commercial artist. He becomes a household name. he then becomes what's now known as an outsider artist, somebody who's producing work in an asylum, and it's very, very interesting. I can't think of any artist who's covered all those bases, not even Richard Dad.
Well, he's sort of looking, I mean, they're almost like Pink Floyd album covers. He's really leaping forward with that work, isn't he?
It's Sergeant Pepper. I mean,
yeah.
And what's so interesting, in 1968, just as Sergeant Pepper is coming out, The Observer, with its spiffy new colour supplement, decides to put, I'm not sure if it's that image, on the front of the Observer supplement in 1968 as an incredibly striking image. And there's a piece inside about mad artists. But the point is, the Observer art editors would not have put that image on the front of their precious new supplement if they didn't think it didn't speak to the sort of Sergeant Pepper moment, as it were. I mean, he becomes incredibly of the moment.
Yeah, exactly. Now, woven through the story of Louis Wain, it works as a biography of him, obviously, but there's also other people and other issues coming in all the way through as you look at the status and the symbol of the cat in the period, which I think you say is roughly 1870 to 1939, just before Second World War.
He dies in 39, so I think that's quite neat as well.
Yeah, that's a nice sort of end point, isn't it? I think there's one character that really
who? I'd like to know.
Me. Well, the Duchess of Bedford. I mean, extraordinary. One of the stories you tell through the book is how the start of cat shows, the start of serious cat breeding, pedigrees, and all that sort of thing. And as you've said before, it really ties into the class system, where again it's another example where cats are mapped onto human life. Like you say, they have names like Princess this or whatever, and Lord so and so. But the Duchess of Bedford really goes in for cats in a big way, but she just seems to be a sort of gigantic personality.
Yeah, she's an extraordinary woman. She's the mistress, the chatelaine of Woburn Abbey, one of the great stately homes of Britain, plus a whole lot more around the country, by the way. I mean, she's not short of a stately home or two. She is very, unlike a lot of aristocratic cat ladies who are actually very interested in breeding cats. She was actually very sorry. Interesting. Sorry, here's another one.
Lovely.
She was. She married into the aristocracy. She was a vicar's daughter, actually. And so she was actually very uncomfortable in the British class system. And her husband's family made her feel like she was literally, at one point, somebody said when she was going to get married to him, well, it's like our sons have married a bar girl, a barmaid. She's a vicar's daughter. She's actually an archdeacon's daughter, But to the aristocrats, of Great Britain, marrying an archdeacon's daughter was the equivalent of marrying a barmaid. So she's already very alert, I think, to that, and she's less interested in breeding cats. There's a lot of very smart ladies that actually like breeding cats. She was very concerned with their safety, and she started, I think, the Society for Protection of Cats. She was very keen on some of her cats were fancy Siamese, but others had just simply been rescued from the streets of London. They were moggies. So she was very, very she would pay cat's meat men. These were men who went around the streets of London selling cheap horseflesh for cats. She would pay them if they would snitch every time they thought they came across a case of cat cruelty going on behind closed doors. So she was running a sort of one woman kind of cat neighborhood watch, and she was absolutely fascinating. But the very interesting thing, I think, is that, of course, she was just a shocking mother. She had one baby 9 months after her marriage, whereupon her husband's family decided, because she was a barmaid, an archdeacon's daughter, she wasn't really a suitable person to bring up this child. So the child was taken away from her and brought up by a governess who was actually the Duke's mistress. So very oddly, this kind of menage a trois went on at Woburn quite happily, with the Duchess looking after cats, running her Cats Protection League, the Duchess going off with the governess, and a thoroughly confused little boy, I have to say, who grew up to be the next Duke of Bedford, who was just very, very confused by it all. He refused to be interested in his mother's cats, and there was only one sort of animal that the Duchess didn't like. She loved all animals. That was spiders. She was frightened of them. And so the little boy, Hastings, he was called, decided to develop a passion for spiders just to get back at his mother. So it was a very unhappy household. But again, why I find it very interesting is that, again, you see even in the grandest households where there's ample resources and plenty of space for everybody to do their own thing, you do see these kinds of very difficult relationship tensions being worked out through animals and cats.
I love the fact that she taught herself to fly a plane when she was 60. Is that right? I mean, it didn't end altogether happily for her, but I mean, wow, what a gal! I mean,
but in an absolutely sort of can-do attitude. She took it up because she suffered from tinnitus, that very unpleasant buzzing in the ears, and she'd been told that actually if she went up to high altitudes it might help. And so that's when she got her pilot's license and flew to Australia, as you do. Absolutely extraordinary. Yeah.
A wonderful woman. Now, you shine a light onto, we've just mentioned this, but you shine a light on something that I've seen referred to in many, many books and novels, the cat's meat man.
Yeah.
I was very interested in the fact that, again, they're sort of looked after because in a sense they look after cats. So there's this wonderful dinner that is
the Duchess
charitable
runs.
Dinner that the Duchess runs for Cat's Meat Men, just to sort of keep them at it. So how did that trade, I mean, presumably that trade developed with what we've been talking about, this advance of the cat into the household?
I think it's an extremely important sort of sociological and psychological moment in so let's say sort of the bottom half of the middle class going down into the upper working class. That moment at which you think of your cat, you think, I don't think it's getting enough mice. I don't think there are enough beetles. It's looking a bit thin. I think we should take some money out of the household budget every week and supplement its feeding. I think that's psychologically very important, because that's the point at which you think, oh, I have a responsibility. This is a family member. I have a responsibility. And so not that we're going to spoil these cats, of course, but they need something extra. And so this trade starts up where men, every morning, rather like milkmen used to do, they have a cart with cheap horse meat, which has been sort of lightly boiled, which they then push around the streets, crying out, "Cat's meat, cat's meat!" And then you can come out and you can buy a bit of meat for your cat. So it's kind of meat that isn't really fit for human consumption, but you can buy it for your cat. So that's very interesting, because it's an example of the cat creating one of many, actually, completely new industries. I mean, there were no cat's meat before. It didn't exist. Now, suddenly, we've got this entirely new race of people who become part of the sort of fabric of daily life, along with the milkman and the butcher calling. You've got these, they were mainly men, pushing their barrows around the street. And of course, they were extraordinary, because of course all the stray cats and one or two stray dogs would follow these cat's meat men, so they became like Pied Pipers. They would be walking through the street, and by and large these men were fond of animals, which again makes sense. I mean, why would you go into that work if you didn't think it was important? So they would often be slipping stray cats a little bit of meat and so forth. And that is why the Duchess particularly took up their cause, because she wanted to develop their sense of, you are doing a very important job. You know, we depend on you. You are our sort of eyes and ears. You will know when a cat is stray or is being ill-treated or is locked up in a room or a house and not let out. So it was a kind of quite interesting kind of symbiotic relationship between the vicar's daughter, which is what the Duchess actually was, and this entirely new kind of class of people called catsmeat men.
Yeah, it's just another wonderful strand in the story that you tell, that again kind of fits in with sort of, I love the popular culture aspect of it and the way that it makes, it brings Victorian and Edwardian life to light in a way. You know, you can hear the cry in the streets. Yeah. I mean, it must have been connected to the fact that there were so many horses around. It was the main kind of, you know, mode of transport. So I guess when the horses went, the catsmeat man would kind of go as well. But it also meant that then that Louis Wain can do lots of pictures of cats driving cars now. It's always moving with the times in some way, isn't he?
He is, again, he has a journalist's eye, which he had a noticing eye, you know, for all we talk about his strangeness and oddness, he was clearly in the world. He liked to go out in the world and look. And he's very interested. And it must have been absolutely thrilling when cars start, because suddenly, as you say, we've got cats driving cars very badly, it turns out. Surprise, surprise. They find their paws find it difficult to use the steering wheel. So, you know, they're always crashing into ditches and things like that. But Wain, again, very interested in moving with the times. He has cat chauffeurs, but also cat lady chauffeurs who are got up in very nice kind of quite sexy outfit. It's very odd. Now they have busts underneath their chauffeur outfit and little pink caps. They're looking rather jaunty, like sort of first generation air hostesses, and they're driving people around London. So again, and I suspect that he must have seen that. I don't think he invented it from his imagination. So again, there's this new mobility. And then once aeroplanes start becoming kind of visible, just at the beginning of the First War, again, cats, there's ample opportunity for them to go up into the skies and come down really quite quickly, actually, because again, surprise, surprise, cats are really rubbish at piloting planes. So again, you know, Wain, to be fair to him, he's not stuck in the past. You know, he's not stuck in the era of the stagecoach. He is a journalist in the real sense of kind of keeping up with the newness of the now.
The bit where you identify him as maybe losing his touch is in the First World War, and the image of the squaddy, the soldier in the trenches, who's still sort of saying things like, here I shall be safe from the machinations of women who want to trap me into matrimony. And as you point out, the narrative was much more of people longing to get back to their sweetheart. And this is this sort of kink that he had about, you know, this idea that women are always trying to trap men. He couldn't seem to shake it off.
Well, it's very interesting. So that image that you mentioned, it's still a very popular one today. It often gets used without the bit at the bottom. So it just looks like a squaddy in a trench having a fag. You know, thank God the Germans have gone over there. And it's great. It looks like a slightly nationalistic, but, you know, absolutely fine. And that's because Wain's work could be recycled, and often those slightly problematic captions just disappeared. But you're right. The caption is something about like, well, over here, you know, thank God, all those meddling mammas who want to get me married off. And it's so misses the tone. It's so misses the tone. And you're right. I identify that as just a moment where he just doesn't quite get it. Having said that, he produced an awful lot of very popular work in the First World War, which was usually, he did these flag cats. So it's a cat's outline, but they're sort of painted in with British, Belgian, and sometimes American colours, so sort of patriotic stuff. So there's plenty of, as long as he doesn't put too many captions on them, it's absolutely fine. But he's sort of losing his kind of verbal dexterity. That's just not how people speak anymore. Yes. It's like being put back in the days of the 1890s or something like that, where his cats are
sort of mashers and
mashers.
That kind of
it's kind of, what, don't look now, there's a mama around the corner, and then there'll be a great big mama and a simpering daughter who's trying to get off with, that was the 1890s, and it worked delightfully in that sort of fin de siècle, slightly sexy, slightly carry on kind of world. Just doesn't work in 1917,
Yeah. But generally, he moved with the times.
Yeah.
And maybe it was just, it's probably the power of cats that, as we've said, is sort of still with us today. So we have been talking about your book, Catland, wonderful social history, fascinating, with feline enchantment and the making of the modern world. So we've gone into quite a lot of that aspect of it. I think I will ask you my 3 final questions now, if that's okay. So maybe favorite artwork.
Okay.
Cat linked or not cat linked?
This is. I thought I'm a bit catted out, to be honest. So I thought I'd pick. It's a picture by an early 19th century artist whose work I adore. Not that well known, but you may have heard of him, called John Sell Cotman. He did a lot of landscapes. He was an East Anglian landscape at the time of Constable. And again, why I pick it, obviously I've got a bee in my bonnet, is again, he's a slightly struggling artist, prodigiously gifted, and he can't find any takers for his watercolours because they're too abstract. And so, like so many artists, including Constable, including Gainsborough, he's told to go and paint faces, do portraits. You'll always be all right with portraits. You'll always make the rent. Yeah. Constable and Gainsborough also hated doing it, but Cotman, being a keen little soldier, decides to go and he'll practice first of all. So he practices on his wife. And he paints this wonderful picture in 1808 of her as a young woman, about 25. And it's beautifully done. You can see it in Norwich Castle Museum. But it's not the sort of portrait that any Norwich lady or any East Anglian lady worth her salt would want to pay to be painted like, because he paints her in profile. She's got a very big nose. He paints her as if she's just come out of the East Anglian chill, so she's got that lovely sort of ruddy kind of look. Her hair's just tied up. She appears to have borrowed his greatcoat. So it's quite a mannish look. And there is this enormous nose, which she did have in real life. I think it's beautiful because it is suffused with love. He adored her. But again, it's just an example of a true artist who just can't quite work within the limits of what's needed.
What's expected.
What's expected is a head-on, cute little girl in a low-cut frock, and he can't do that. So it's the portrait is called Mrs. Anne Cotman, and it's 1808, and you can see it. It's easily available online, but you can see it in the real thing in Castle Museum in Norwich, and I love it for that reason.
I'm going to check it out. That's a wonderful choice. How did you come across it? Was it following his work, or you hang around in the Norwich Castle Museum?
I used to be professor at University of East Anglia.
Oh, of course.
I was academic. So I, in my lunch hour, I used to go and have a whiz round. And I'd never heard of Cotman. And I walked into the gallery and I was just struck by this extraordinary picture. Because I thought it was beautiful. And then the curator who showed me around said, well, actually, people just thought it was a sad disaster, And I just got really interested in the biography. So.
Yes, I think a painting that struck me when I walked into a gallery, and this was in Brussels, and I guess it was the Musée de Beaux-Arts, but it's David's painting of Marat dead in his bath.
Yeah.
and it sort of feels life-size. It's the most extraordinary thing. You feel like you're in the room, and again, it's unvarnished. It's real. It's horrible.
He looks dead. He is actually dead, isn't he?
He is actually
He's
dead.
got that grey-green kind of quality to the flesh.
He's starting to decompose. He's sort of, but it's just such a powerful statement about, the state of the revolution as was, somebody who was in that room in that moment. So some works of art, you can just go into a gallery and go, oh, that one, and it can pull you in. That was... Well, so the Book of Shame is the book that we all expect Kathryn Hughes to have read. I don't know whether you'd go for something Victorian, but is there? Don't tell me you haven't read Middlemarch.
No, that would be awful. No, it's. I feel ashamed. I even thought about, should I really say this, because I've never read Madame Bovary.
Oh, right. Oh,
and
okay.
It's a book, and one of the reasons I haven't. So, I should have read it because it comes out in 1857, just when George Eliot is starting to write. Mm-hmm. It's about all the things that interest me, which is about the move away from romanticism towards realism. Now, Emma Bovary's problem, as I understand, since I haven't read the book, is that she's a provincial doctor's wife who gets caught up on ideas of love and beauty, and she should be having a nicer life, and she can't reconcile herself to the very ordinariness of life. And that is exactly what Eliot is writing about the same year in a book called Scenes of Clerical Life. And there's a character in there again who just wants life to be. She doesn't want to be in Nuneaton, she wants to be somewhere else. Mm-hmm. So I haven't read it, and partly because, I know this is really silly, is because so many people kind of keep on saying, you must read it, you love it, it's really important, I've just taken against it. I've just taken against it. I just think, maybe I won't like it. Maybe it's not that good. How do you know what I would like? That sort of, and I'm damned now if I'm good. I've got a copy here, and it's, so but I'm not going to read it. I just think, no.
You're being defiant.
My days I don't have to take any more exams. I don't have to write any more theses. I'll do what I like. No, but it is interesting to me because again, a bit like it comes at a pivotal moment where people are getting to terms with the reality of this real world, this real, rather unglamorous, very material world, of finding it's not a place of gorgeous beauty, truth, light. So that's.
Wow. Well, I might take that as a tip in a way, because I have a friend who is involved in the law, who is not on the lawyer side, not on the criminal side. I feel I should add. And I'm always saying, you've not read Bleak House. You haven't read Bleak House. And I now think I've got to that point where I might be building up resentment towards this wonderful book. So I think I'll back off on that. So my last question, any bizarre or humorous feedback on your work?
Yes. So about 8 years ago, I stopped reading Amazon reviews because they were just getting a bit upsetting. But so the one that sort of, well, it was more than a review. It was like people were having a conversation about me in the reviews, and it said, it was sort of, Kathryn Hughes could be a good writer, but unfortunately she is just obsessed with the seamy, S-E-E-M-Y, the seamy side of life. And then somebody else had it's like, no, it's such a shame. She seems absolutely obsessed with sex, and she has to drag it in, and it's very, very unpleasant. And I was sort of mortified. I mean, I'm not aware. And then I started to think maybe I am some sort of carry-on figure and I don't know it. The way sex has become so repressed to me that I just literally exploding all over. It's like basically everything I say is a double entendre. I don't think so. I mean, it is true that I'm very interested in the 19th century, which has been seen as completely incorrectly as a time of, decorum and repression. And I am very interested in teasing out those places where those boundaries break through or come out in odd ways, or, a bit as we've been talking about Louis Wain and the cats. I discovered, for instance, that my proud moment was I discovered that Mrs. Beeton had syphilis, but I didn't give her syphilis. It was her husband who gave her. So I was being sort of slightly mortified, and I'm still slightly wonder when I go out. I don't go to many sort of booky things. I sort of think when people sit down to me next to the table, do they go, "Oh, it's that Carry On woman, Kathryn Hughes. She's just smart all the time. It's like 1975 all over again." So I don't know. So that's I haven't been out of order, have I?
We haven't even talked about pussies at all.
No, I know. And we could have done. Because I've got a chapter.
We've made no obvious jokes, and there is a chapter, but it's just a chapter and it's only short. So, that is funny. It reminds me of the time somebody wrote into the paper in the days when people wrote into papers and said, I had a column and they said something like, I don't normally read her because of her terrible gutter language. And I mean, I was just mystified. I was completely mystified. I thought, I don't sort of effing blind all the way through these columns. I just don't. But again, we can't control how people see us.
Thank God, actually. I mean, but we don't have to read it. That's the point. We don't have to read it anymore.
Yes, I think that was probably a very good moment at which to tap out of reading Amazon reviews.
Yeah.
And it could work the other way. Somebody could go, I've got to check this woman's stuff out. I mean, that's the thing about a bad review, I find.
Yeah.
If you say, I absolutely hate this sort of thing, I don't like this, or this. I find it with film reviews. Sometimes I go, that's exactly what I love. I must go and see this film straight away. So it could work both ways. But yes, that's very funny. I had not seen you up to now, Kathryn, as some kind of smut merchant.
Thank God.
I think we can put that to bed.
Thank you.
In the book bag.
My mother will be delighted. Thank you.
Marvellous. And Maud is still fast asleep, so we haven't roused her with our terrible talk of smutty things. So she's been so good, but not because you have superglued her to that shelf. She's there of her own accord, and we feel sort of gratified by her gracious presence.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for joining me in the book bag. It's been super fun.
I really enjoyed it. I've so enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Marvellous. Thank you. And farewell. I shall bid you and the kitty farewell. Thank you very much for joining us for this unashamed chat about the wonderfulness of cats and how interesting they are as somebody said, something to think with. I think that's what Kathryn is doing in this book, using cats to shed such an interesting light on this whole Victorian, Edwardian, and even into the Georgian period. So thank you for joining us. Join me next time. I will rustle up another wonderful writer for you. We've been talking about Catland, and I thoroughly recommend it. Cheerio.